I'm writing this because for 3 weeks, everyone at my company believed I'd flushed $2.3 million down the drain with a single careless click. My name was attached to it in meeting notes, in Slack threads I wasn't invited to, and eventually in an email titled Next Steps. That's the kind of subject line that tells you your job is already over. They're just deciding how clean they want the paperwork to look. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't even deny it out loud at first. Because the worst part wasn't the money. It was how quickly people decided the story made sense. I worked in finance operations at a mid-sized tech company that had just crossed into serious money territory. Not a startup anymore, not corporate enough to be careful. I wasn't an exec. I wasn't junior either. I was the guy who made sure invoices didn't go out wrong, vendors got paid on time, and nothing embarrassing happened that had to be explained to the board. Which is why when a 7-figure payment went out twice to the same vendor, my name was the easiest one to circle. The process was boring by design. Vendor submits invoice, ops reviews, manager approves, treasury releases payment. 4 steps, 4 sets of eyes, everything logged. I had reviewed that invoice on a Tuesday afternoon, same as dozens of others. Numbers matched the contract. No red flags. I marked it, reviewed, and moved on. 2 days later, the payment hit. $2.3 million. Then 3 days after that, it hit again. I found out the way you never want to, by being added late to a calendar invite called Urgent Payment Incident. When I joined, everyone else was already there. Cameras on, legal, my manager, a VP I'd spoken to maybe twice in my life. No one asked how my morning was. They walked through the timeline slowly, carefully, like a prosecutor laying out a case. Duplicate payment. Vendor confirmed receipt. Funds unrecoverable for now. Internal review pointed to a failure in invoice processing. Then my manager said very calmly, "The invoice was last touched by him." "Not reviewed." "Touched," I corrected him. Politely. I said I reviewed it, yes, but I didn't approve or release anything. He nodded like that was an interesting detail, not an important one. Someone from legal asked if I was aware of how serious this was. The VP asked me to walk them through my thought process at the time. That's when I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a rehearsal. By the end of the call, access to the payment system was pulled temporarily. HR wanted a meeting to support me through this. Slack went quiet in a very specific way. Messages still coming in, just not to me. I went from being reliable to radioactive in under an hour. That night, I replayed the review in my head like a bad song you can't turn off. The numbers, the date, the vendor name. Nothing was wrong. I knew that with the kind of certainty you only get when you've done something 100 times the same way, but certainty doesn't matter when a narrative has momentum. The next morning, my manager stopped by my desk, something he hadn't done in months. He lowered his voice and said, "Look, I'm on your side, but this doesn't look good." He suggested I write a statement, taking responsibility for the oversight, so we could control the damage. He said it would go a long way with leadership. That's when the fear really set in. Not panic, something colder. Because I understood what he was offering me. A soft landing in exchange for a clean scapegoat. Sign the story and they'd make it quick. Refuse and I'd be difficult. I didn't answer him right away. I asked for time to review the logs myself. He hesitated, just a second too long, then said, "IT would handle that." I nodded, thanked him, and sat there staring at my monitor, long after he walked away. I was being blamed for a mistake I didn't make, and everyone around me was acting like the evidence already existed. But there was one thing that kept bothering me, one small procedural detail that didn't fit the version they were selling. At the time, I couldn't prove it. I couldn't even explain it clearly. I just knew that if the payment really had happened the way they said it did, the system would have had to break its own rules, and systems don't break quietly. By the end of that week, the tone had shifted from investigating to containing. Meetings stopped being about facts and started being about optics. I wasn't asked what happened anymore. I was asked how quickly it could be resolved. HR sent me a calendar invite titled Process Alignment. Legal asked me to forward any notes I'd kept so far. My manager stopped making eye contact. I asked again for system logs, not everything, just the invoice history, version changes, approval timestamps, the basic stuff you'd expect in any finance review. The answer came back through my manager this time. Phrased carefully, access was restricted to preserve integrity. Translation, I was officially a risk. That's when people started rewriting the story in real time. Someone said I'd rushed the review. Another person mentioned I'd been overloaded that week, as if that explained a duplicate payment. None of that was true, but it didn't matter. They weren't testing accuracy. They were testing which version would stick. The vendor, meanwhile, went quiet. Treasury told leadership recovery would be challenging. Challenging is corporate code for don't expect it back. And every time the money came up, my name followed it, like a footnote no one bothered to read. My manager called me into a one-on-one late Friday afternoon. The timing wasn't subtle. He closed the door and leaned against the desk instead of sitting down. He told me the company needed someone to own the breakdown. He said the board was anxious. He said if I cooperated, there might be a path that didn't damage my future prospects. He never said fired. He didn't have to. I asked him directly if anyone else had approved the invoice. He said yes, procedurally. I asked if that approval was logged. He said the system showed my name as the last meaningful touch point. That word again. Meaningful. I told him that wasn't how the workflow worked. Reviews didn't trigger payments. Approvals did. He agreed vaguely, then said something that stuck with me. At a certain level, nuance gets lost. That night, I didn't sleep. I wasn't panicking anymore. I was angry in a quiet, focused way, the kind that strips things down to essentials. I opened my laptop and wrote out the entire payment process from memory. Every gate, every permission, every timestamp the system was required to generate. I knew those systems. I'd helped design parts of them. And there it was. The thing I couldn't stop thinking about. The invoice approval window. Once an invoice passed review, it was locked, unless a manager reopened it. If someone reopened it, the system generated a new version number and a new timestamp, no exceptions. It was there to prevent exactly this kind of mess. So if the invoice had been changed after my review, even slightly, the system would say so. Monday morning, I went to IT directly. Not casually, not emotionally. I submitted a formal request for audit logs related to my user account. Not the invoice. Me. Login times. Session durations. IP addresses. Things HR couldn't block without raising their own red flags. 2 hours later, my access badge stopped working on one door. HR called it a standard precaution. My manager called it temporary. Legal didn't call it anything, they just stopped replying. I was told to work from home until the review concluded, which meant no hallway conversations, no overheard corrections, no chance to remind people I was still human. Just email threads where I was CC'd instead of addressed. Then came the document, a draft statement. It was framed as collaborative, but it read like a confession with better grammar. It said I'd failed to properly escalate an anomaly. It said I accepted responsibility for the duplicate payment. It said nothing about approvals, version history, or controls. I didn't sign it. Instead, I waited. Late that afternoon, an automated email landed in my inbox. No subject line I recognized. Just a system-generated alert from our identity platform confirming a successful login to my account. During a time I had been in a recorded HR meeting, on camera, with my screen shared. The login wasn't me. I stared at the timestamp for a long time, down to the second. It wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't a feeling. It was a crack in their timeline. And once you see a crack like that, you stop defending yourself. You start building a case. The first real loss wasn't my access or my reputation, it was my sense of time. Days stopped having edges. I'd wake up already tense, refresh my inbox, reread the same threads, then stare at the wall like something might appear on it. Friends told me to relax, that companies fix these things. They don't understand how fast a narrative hardens once money and egos get involved. By the second week, people weren't asking if I'd messed up. They were asking why. HR scheduled another meeting. Same faces, same careful voices. This one was about next steps. Severance language crept in, disguised as concern. They offered me a choice between two options that were functionally identical. Both assumed guilt. Both required a signature. I declined again. That's when the pressure turned personal. My manager stopped being diplomatic. He told me I was risking my career over semantics. He reminded me that finance was a small world. He said companies don't like people who fight internal findings. The implication was clear. This wasn't about truth anymore. It was about compliance. I almost broke that night. Not because I doubted myself, because I was tired. Tired of being treated like a problem instead of a person. Tired of explaining the same thing to people who weren't listening. Tired of holding on to details while everyone else moved on. But exhaustion has a side effect no one talks about. It strips away the need to be liked. I stopped replying emotionally. I stopped trying to convince anyone. I created a folder on my desktop and named it with the date. Inside it, I started saving everything. Calendar invites, email headers, meeting recordings, system alerts, not interpretations, raw data. The login alert kept bothering me. I pulled the metadata. The IP address wasn't mine. It traced back to the office network, not my home. That alone didn't prove much. VPNs exist, but it narrowed the window. I checked my calendar. The login occurred 12 minutes into an HR call. Cameras on, screen shared. I couldn't have been typing, even if I wanted to. Then I requested one more thing from IT. This time citing a compliance clause I knew by heart. Session-level access logs tied to my credentials. Read-only. Time limited. Something an auditor would ask for. They delayed. 2 days. Then 4. Then legal replied asking why I needed it. That question answered everything. I went around them. The vendor portal was external. Our company didn't control it. Vendors uploaded invoices there, edited them there, and those changes synced into our system. I contacted the vendor's finance team directly, not accusing, just asking for their records, invoice submission time, modification history. Their system didn't care about our politics. It just logged events. When the file came back, I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not triumph. Clarity. The invoice had been edited after my review. Not the amount, the memo field. A meaningless change, except for one thing. It reset the approval chain. New version, new timestamps. The system did exactly what it was designed to do, which meant the approval that triggered the second payment couldn't have happened when leadership claimed it did. I lined up the timelines side by side, my review, the edit, the approval, the payment release, then my HR meeting, then the login alert. Every piece fit, but not in the order they'd presented. That night, I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't been unlucky. I'd been useful. My role made me credible enough to blame and disposable enough to sacrifice. Someone higher up had approved a bad payment, noticed too late, and needed the story to stop climbing. I wasn't collateral damage. I was the break. I stopped thinking about saving my job. I started thinking about ending the story. The next morning, I didn't send emails. I didn't ask for meetings. I assembled a packet. Clean. Minimal. No commentary. Just evidence, indexed and timestamped. I addressed it to internal audit and legal together, not as an accusation, but as a request for clarification. And then I waited. Because once facts exist outside a single chain of command, control disappears. The response came faster than I expected, not with explanation, with noise. My calendar filled up within an hour. Quick sync. Alignment check. Clarifying discussion. People who hadn't spoken to me in weeks suddenly needed my availability. Legal replied first, politely thanking me for the materials and asking me not to share them further to avoid confusion. Internal audit scheduled a call for the following morning. By the afternoon, things started breaking. My manager called me from a private number. He didn't bother with small talk. He asked why I'd gone outside the team. I told him I hadn't. Audit and legal were the team when money went missing. He went quiet, then said I was making this worse for everyone. That word again. Everyone. An hour later, HR sent me a revised document. The language had changed. Less confession, more mutual separation, more money, faster exit. All contingent on signing by end of day. It was the corporate equivalent of a plea deal. I didn't respond. That evening, internal audit joined the thread. Not to argue, to ask questions, specific ones, about timestamps, about version numbers, about why an invoice would show an approval tied to my credentials. During a period my access had already been restricted. Legal's tone changed after that. Over the next 2 days, the company went into quiet chaos. Emergency meetings behind closed doors, policy reviews no one had asked for, IT requests marked urgent. My access wasn't restored, but no one asked me to sign anything either. Silence settled in, the heavy kind where you know decisions are being made without you, in the room. Then audit requested something simple. A live walkthrough of the payment workflow. No hypotheticals, no blame. Just screens, logs, and time. The walkthrough did what arguments couldn't. It showed in real time how the system behaved when an invoice was edited post-review. New version, new approval, immutable timestamps. No way around it without deliberate misuse of credentials. The room went very quiet. That afternoon, my manager was removed from the thread. No announcement, no explanation. Just gone. A VP stepped in to help coordinate. He asked me if anyone had ever asked me to backdate approvals or reuse credentials. I said no, but I didn't need to say more. The logs were already answering for me. By Friday, the narrative collapsed under its own weight. The duplicate payment hadn't been a process failure. It had been an approval made in a hurry, then disguised as an ops error when it went wrong. My name had been used because it fit neatly into the gap. Legal called me directly for the first time. They didn't apologize. They thanked me for my professionalism and said the company was reviewing personnel matters unrelated to my performance. They asked if I'd be willing to discuss resolution options. That night, I realized something else had changed. No one was asking me to explain myself anymore. They were explaining themselves to me. And once that happens, the outcome isn't chaos, it's consequences. The formal email arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 weeks after the payment went out. No dramatic subject line, no corporate poetry, just a PDF attached and a sentence that said the company had completed its review. The document did 3 things in that order. First, it stated, explicitly, that I was not responsible for the duplicate payment. Not indirectly, not procedurally, not in part. It said the failure occurred outside my scope of authority, and after my review, window had closed. Black text, clean language, signed by legal. Second, it corrected the internal record. Every reference to ops error tied to my name was removed. Audit had insisted on it. The payment was reclassified as an unauthorized approval action. They didn't name the person in the document, but they didn't need to. Internally, everyone already knew. Third, it outlined my exit, not termination. Separation by mutual agreement. Enhanced severance. Full bonus payout. Benefits extended. Non-disparagement that cut both ways. A clause stating the company would confirm my role and performance without qualification to any future employer. I read it twice, then once more, slowly. An hour later, HR called. This time the voice was different, softer, careful. They said they understood the past weeks had been challenging. They thanked me for how I'd handled myself. They said leadership wanted to move forward constructively. I agreed to the terms, not because I wanted out, but because staying would have meant pretending nothing had happened. And I wasn't interested in working somewhere that needed a scapegoat before it needed the truth. By the end of the week, the consequences finished rolling downhill. My manager was gone. No farewell message, no handoff email. His calendar vanished overnight. The VP who had pressured him into owning the narrative was put on leave, then quietly exited 2 weeks later. Officially, it was unrelated. Unofficially, everyone understood. The vendor returned most of the money, not because they had to, but because audit's findings gave Treasury leverage. The board was briefed, controls were updated, new approval thresholds were announced in an all-hands meeting where my name was never mentioned. And that was fine with me. On my last day, I logged in for the final time to clean out my files. The folder with the date was still there. I deleted it, not out of mercy, out of closure. The story didn't need me anymore. A month later, I accepted a role at another company. During the background check, they called my former employer. I know because the recruiter told me what they said. He was thorough, calm under pressure, left in good standing. That was it. No mention of the payment. No shadow. No footnote. What stayed with me wasn't anger. It was clarity. I learned how quickly facts get bent when they're inconvenient, and how fragile power becomes when timestamps don't lie. I learned that staying quiet isn't the same as being passive, and that patience, when paired with proof, is a form of leverage. They thought I was the easiest story to tell. They were wrong. Because in the end, the truth didn't need volume. It just needed time.